As Apple has set its sights on AI growth, the European Union has its sights set on the tech giant itself, charging the company for failing to comply with a digital competition law. Could this take a bite into what's ahead for Apple? For this and more, let's get to Bob O'Donnell, TECHnalysis Research President and Chief Analyst. Good to see you, Bob. Thanks for being here. So let's get to that EU law first, right? Because this is the first case that we have seen been brought as part of this Digital Markets Act. It has to do specifically with what the EU is charging as unfair restrictions on developers in the App Store. And it could result in a fine for Apple. How seriously should folks be taking this?
Well, I mean, look, Julie, it's going to take a while before any of this hits. I mean, they announced that we're looking at it. They opened the investigation in March. They give themselves a year, which means there's no official word on part of this until March of 2025. So nothing right away. But look, I mean, Apple made some changes at the beginning of the year in reaction to, the changes that we knew were coming here in the EU. But there were a lot of people saying, look, you may have followed the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law. And I think that's what's kind of coming back to them is people saying, look, you're not really making it easy for these smaller developers to really be able to get access to this huge bounty of iPhone users. And Europe is last quarter, it was about 25% of Apple's earnings. So this is a big market for Apple. And Europe is setting the standards as far as how companies have to think about providing access to alternatives like, different app stores and things like that. Apple's always wanted to keep a closed garden. They've done it very successfully up till now. But the EU is basically saying, you got to open it up a little bit more, and not just exactly to the letter of the law, but to the spirit as well. And I think that's essentially what the concern is.
And Bob, though, you look at investors, how they're reacting. I mean, they are taking this in stride. I mean, Apple is actually up about 0.7% in today's trade. Do you think investors, Bob, are they being too complacent, or no? You think ultimately this is going to work out? Apple's going to, at the end of the day, make some tweaks that in some way make regulators and investors happy?
I think it's a little bit of both, Josh. I mean, bottom line is, again, it's going to take a while before anything immediate happens. So to react to the price, to the stock today seems like it would be a bit much. I do think Apple is going to have to make some tweaks, some things that they don't necessarily want to do. But at the end of the day, again, it's an important enough market that they're going to have to follow some of these requirements that the EU is putting into place. And therefore, long term, I don't think the impact is that big of a deal as far as the value of the company and the way people view the stock. I think there are other issues that are going to be important for Apple to deal with in Europe. And of course, this whole idea that they're not going to bring their Apple Intelligence features, their new AI stuff, to Europe looks to be very interesting. You have to wonder, is there a little bit of chicken going on here? Like, hey, if you're going to take this away from us, then we're going to keep some of these features away from people in Europe. I don't know for sure if that's really the case, but you got to wonder if that goes into some of these decisions.
Right, and there has been some reporting to that effect, Bob. Let's talk about then the other sort of related story, because if they're holding back on AI features, and that's that they are looking to potentially partner with Meta, looking at AI. Now, I don't know if this is a big shock that Apple sort of is casting a wide net when it comes to its AI development. What do you think?
Well, the biggest shock, honestly, was the fact that Apple brought in anybody. And then, of course, they announced with OpenAI as being integrated into Siri, which is very interesting because, the implications of that are that the entire Siri experience isn't controlled by Apple. I mean, of course, yes, they give you the warnings, et cetera, et cetera. But I think, there's a couple things going on. Number one, immediately, even at the event itself, they admitted, yeah, we're talking to Google too, as some of the reporting that, we've seen other people talk about say. And then, so it's not a surprise at all that they're going to talk to Meta and some of these other big AI firms. The bigger question to me is, how is that going to actually play out? If I'm an end user and I'm using these Apple devices and I want to use these Apple Intelligence features, will I make my choice between, ChatGPT, OpenAI's ChatGPT and Google Gemini Pro and the Meta Llama stuff? Or is that going to be a little bit controlled by Apple, or will it be region by region? I mean, Apple's install base being as large as it is, any service that gets access to that install base, it's a huge benefit to them. So, Apple knows how valuable that is. And I think they're going to be very cautious in the manner with which they deliver those capabilities and which companies are going to benefit from that. So that's, my big question mark there is like, hey, how is this actually going to work? And then again, ultimately down the road, are there going to be payouts involved? Initially, of course, it was reported that there aren't going to be any, but all these things can change.
It was interesting, Bob, just the fact that, reportedly Apple and Meta are even talking. I mean, these two have, they certainly had their kind of ups and downs, Bob, over the years. You think of issues like ad targeting. I was interested, though, also just kind of a broader question, too, Bob, because as you mentioned, so, Apple's partnering with OpenAI, and now we have these reports that are at least, talking to Meta. I wonder if it also tells you something about, as a tech analyst, about where you think the real value is going to be long term. Is it going to be in these LLMs, these large language models we talk so much about, or is that going to be kind of commoditized and the real value down the line will be in the application layer? What do you think?
Well, it's a great question, Josh. And, I think bottom line is we at some point are going to see commoditization of these big, large language models. And I think Apple is part of what they're doing. Part of that strategy is to say, look, we're going to make sure not one company gets all the eggs in their basket, because that would give them a lot more power and a lot more value. So if in fact they sort of spread the wealth, as it were, it does start to commoditize the value. Again, the question will be, how good is that experience? And you're right, that application layer, in this case, it would be Siri or other services that Apple lays on top of that underlying search engine. And, just as they did with Google for, Apple search, or for searching within any of, with Safari and what have you, where does that lie, and where does that value lie, and where do these things go? Those are all questions that remain to be answered. A lot of people still investigating that, how these are going to work. I think it's critical that you do have some high quality large language models. And I do think some of the big guys are going to win, and they're going to profit from them in some way. But there's a question of degree. And is it going to be more based on the way that the large language model delivers its information, or the applications that leverage those large language models? And I think we're still going to figure those out. Apple clearly for now is going to focus on the application layer, but at some point down the road, you have to imagine they're going to have their own answer so that they don't have to go outside, because that's very atypical of Apple. And I think you're going to want to have them control the whole experience, as they typically have always done with all their other services.
Bob, always great to have you on the show, my friend. Thanks for hopping on.
Thanks, Josh.